You think you can judge me just by the color of my skin? Maya Johnson muttered under her breath, staring into the rearview mirror of her Superbike. Her leather gloves gripped the handles tightly, the engine rumbling beneath her, but her mind was elsewhere, sharp, focused. The sun was just beginning to dip below the horizon, casting an amber glow over the empty highway in front of her. She had always loved the open road. Nothing but the wind against her face, the sound of the engine, and the sweet silence that only came when she was alone. But today, something was different. Today, the silence was broken by the flashing lights behind her. It wasn't just any cop car. Two of them, red and blue lights spinning, cutting through the dusk. Maya's heart sank for a split second, then steadied. She had been stopped before, but never like this. Not by two patrol cars. Not by these cops. The officer approached her from behind the cruiser, his boots clanging against the asphalt. Maya could feel his gaze even before he spoke. License and registration. The officer demanded, his voice stern, no hint of recognition in his tone. He didn't even try to hide the judgment in his eyes. Maya turned the engine off with a soft click, the bike's vibrations ceasing instantly. She looked up at the officer. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a look that screamed authority. "Is there a problem, officer?" Maya asked, keeping her voice level. The officer glanced down at her Superbike, a slight smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. He didn't expect her to be the one asking the questions. "You were speeding," he said, ignoring her tone. "On a bike like this? What? Do you think you're above the law?" Maya's jaw clenched. She'd heard it all before, the assumptions, the judgments, the quick conclusions. But this time, it was different. She wasn't just anyone. "I wasn't speeding, officer," she said calmly. "You're mistaken." The officer snorted, clearly unconvinced. "Right? And what? You think I'm just going to let you off easy? You're just a woman on a bike. A black woman at that. What's your story, huh?" Maya narrowed her eyes, feeling the weight of his words, his obvious disdain. She was used to it. She had been used to it her entire life. But she wasn't going to let him win this time. Not this time. With a slow, deliberate motion, Maya reached for the back pocket of her leather jacket. The officer's eyes flicked to her hand, his hand tightening around his baton. "What are you reaching for?" he demanded, his voice low and threatening. Maya pulled out a sleek black wallet, her fingers brushing the edge of the FBI badge hidden inside. She flipped it open with one smooth motion, the gold emblem gleaming in the dim light. The officer froze. His eyes widened slightly, and for a split second, he looked like he'd seen a ghost. "What is this?" he asked, his voice now tinged with uncertainty. Maya met his gaze, her face stoic, her eyes unblinking. "I'm Special Agent Maya Johnson, FBI. I'm on assignment. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a job to do," she said, her voice unwavering. There was a long, heavy pause. The officer didn't say anything at first, his face pale, his eyes darting from the badge to her face and back again. Maya stood there, the quiet tension between them thick enough to cut with a knife. His confusion was evident, his previous arrogance now replaced with something unfamiliar. Fear. The officer took a step back, almost instinctively, as if realizing that his actions had consequences he hadn't anticipated. He had judged her, underestimated her, assumed things about her simply because of the color of her skin and the bike she was riding. And now, she had just turned the tables. The smirk was gone, replaced by a look of utter disbelief. Maya didn't wait for him to recover. She tucked the badge back into her jacket and slid her helmet back on. "Next time, don't make assumptions," she added coolly, kicking the bike into gear. The officer stood frozen in place, staring after her as she revved the engine, her Superbike roaring back to life. Maya didn't look back. She didn't need to. The message had been delivered loud and clear. The road ahead was hers again, just as it always had been. She didn't need permission to ride it. Not from anyone. The roar of the engine filled the night air as Maya Johnson sped down the highway, her heart racing. With adrenaline, the flashing lights of the police cars were now a distant memory, swallowed up by the vast emptiness of the road. Maya had always loved the rush of the ride, the wind in her hair, the freedom of the open road, and the sound of her Superbike humming beneath her. It was a feeling of pure power, and right now, it felt like a victory. A victory not just for her, but for every time she had ever been underestimated, every time someone had looked at her and assumed she didn't belong. But as the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the asphalt, she knew this was far from over. The officer, the one who had initially judged her, would be back. She was sure of it. He had to be. Maya's phone buzzed in her pocket, pulling her from her thoughts. She glanced at it quickly, an encrypted message from her supervisor at the FBI. She tapped the screen and read the message. Mission update. A local agency is aware of your presence. Stay alert. Maya's grip tightened on the handlebars. She had been assigned to a covert operation, but things were beginning to heat up faster than she had anticipated. The quiet night she had hoped for was slipping away, replaced by the tense anticipation of what was to come. As she continued to ride, her thoughts wandered back to the moment with the officer. His face, frozen in shock when she had flashed her FBI badge, had been the perfect reflection of the bias that people often held. The assumptions, the judgment, all of it had been turned on its head with a simple reveal of who she truly was. But Maya knew that it wouldn't be long before others like him would try to do the same. They wouldn't see her as the special agent she was. They would see the color of her skin and make their judgments. She had to be ready. A few miles ahead, Maya saw the outline of a small diner on the side of the road. It was a place she had passed before but never stopped at. Tonight, it felt like the right moment. She slowed the bike and pulled into the parking lot, the gravel crunching under the tires. As she cut the engine, Maya stood still for a moment, taking in the quiet surroundings. The diner had a few cars parked outside, their owners either inside or nowhere to be seen. She removed her helmet and made her way inside. The bell above the door jingled softly as she entered, and the warm scent of coffee and fried food hit her immediately. Maya's eyes scanned the room briefly. There were only a handful of patrons inside. A couple sat in a booth near the window, talking softly. An older man in a trucker's hat sat at the counter, his head buried in a newspaper. The waitress, a middle-aged woman with a friendly face, glanced up from behind the counter. "You need a seat?" she asked with a smile. "Just a coffee for now," Maya replied, her voice steady. "Coming right up," the waitress said, as she poured coffee into a mug and set it in front of Maya. Maya took a seat at the counter, her fingers curling around the warm cup. She needed a moment to think. Her mind raced with the implications of what had just happened. The encounter with the officer had been a small victory, but it was only the beginning. The road ahead was full of uncertainty. The FBI operation she was involved in wasn't just about protecting high-profile individuals. It was about uncovering something much larger, something that could shake the foundations of the system itself. Maya took a deep breath and sipped her coffee, the rich warmth spreading through her. The waitress returned, wiping her hands on a towel. "You don't look like the type to stop for just coffee," she said with a raised eyebrow. Maya smiled softly. "Sometimes, even people like me need a break," she replied. The waitress seemed to consider this for a moment before nodding and walking away to tend to another customer. Maya's phone buzzed again. Another message from her supervisor. "Be ready. Someone's coming." She frowned, her senses sharpening. This was it. The calm before the storm had ended. She stood up, leaving a tip on the counter, and walked back outside. The sky was darker now, the stars barely visible behind the thick clouds. She slid her helmet back on, feeling the weight of her responsibilities settling in once more. The mission wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. I had been on the road for hours, the night, growing colder and darker around me. The steady hum of the bike beneath me was the only sound, the wind whipping against my face, but my mind was racing. The encounter with the officer earlier had been unsettling in ways I hadn't anticipated. I had expected surprise, maybe confusion, but not this sudden shift. This wasn't the first time someone had underestimated me based on the color of my skin, but this time, something about it had been different. The look in his eyes when he saw my badge, he was terrified, and I couldn't help but feel a strange satisfaction at the shock I'd caused. But that satisfaction was short-lived. The message from my supervisor kept echoing in my mind. "Stay alert. Someone was coming." I didn't know who or what for, but I knew that this quiet moment wouldn't last long. I needed to focus. I needed to be ready for whatever was coming next. I pulled off the highway and into a small rest area, the kind of place people stop at when they need a break but don't want to linger too long. It was nearly empty, just a few trucks parked in the dim light. I parked my bike, stood still for a moment, and breathed in the crisp air, letting it fill my lungs. The sky above was a deep shade of purple, the first stars starting to appear. I could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on me, the quiet before a storm. There was something wrong. I could sense it. I pulled out my phone and checked for any new messages. There was a single one, from an unknown number. I hesitated before opening it. The message read, "I know who you are. You're not the only one with power." I felt a chill run down my spine. My fingers hovered over the phone as I processed the message. I'd been trained for this kind of thing, covert operations, high-stakes situations, but nothing had prepared me for this. Who knew I was here? Who had found me? The silence around me felt oppressive, the air thick with tension. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. I looked around the rest area, scanning the shadows, but there was no one in sight. Just the trucks, parked and silent. I slid my phone back into my pocket and walked to the small vending machine. Near the restroom. I wasn't hungry, but I needed something to focus on, something to distract my mind from the unease growing inside me. I selected a bottle of water and unscrewed the cap, taking a long drink. The cool liquid helped calm me, if only for a moment. As I was about to head back to my bike, a movement caught my eye. A shadow, too swift to be a truck driver, darted behind one of the nearby buildings. I froze, my senses sharp. That wasn't just the wind. I knew I wasn't alone anymore. I took a slow breath and reached for the small gun holstered at my side, though I had no intention of using it unless absolutely necessary. I wasn't here for violence. I was here for something bigger. I made my way toward the back of the rest area, careful to stay out of sight. The dim light from the street lamps barely reached this far, casting long, eerie shadows. As I turned the corner, I saw him, a man in a dark hoodie, his face obscured by the shadows. He didn't see me yet, but I could feel his presence, the weight of his intentions. "You know," I said calmly, my voice carrying into the still night, "I don't appreciate being followed." The man froze, his body stiffening. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then, slowly, he turned to face me. His face was covered in a scarf, but his eyes were sharp, calculating. "I wasn't following you," he said, his voice low, almost too calm. "I'm just here to deliver a message." "From who?" I asked, my heart racing. The man stepped closer, and I instinctively took a step back, keeping my distance. He didn't seem like a threat, but I knew better than to trust appearances. "From someone who's watching you," he replied cryptically, his eyes narrowing. "Someone who's been watching you for a while now. Someone who knows what you're really after." I felt a knot form in my stomach. My training kicked in, and I forced myself to stay calm. "What does that mean?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "You've been digging around in places you shouldn't be," he said, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "But you're not the only one with secrets. You're not the only one who has something to hide." My blood ran cold. The tension between us was thick, almost palpable. I knew the risks of what I was involved in, but now, it felt like the game had changed. "Who sent you?" I demanded, my voice tightening. The man didn't answer. Instead, he took a step forward, dropping a small envelope at my feet. Without another word, he turned and disappeared into the shadows, leaving me standing alone in the dim light. My mind raced as I bent down to pick up the envelope. I didn't open it right away. I knew this was only the beginning of something much bigger, something that would change everything. I glanced around one last time, but the man was gone. Only the sound of the wind and the distant hum of the highway filled the silence. I walked back to my bike, the envelope clutched tightly in my hand. I had no idea who was behind all of this, but I knew one thing for sure. Things were about to get a whole lot more complicated. I held the envelope in my hand, feeling its weight, the slight crinkle of paper as I squeezed it between my fingers. I had no idea what was inside, but something told me it wasn't good. Whatever this was, it was bigger than just a random encounter. It was part of something much darker, something I was only beginning to understand. As I climbed onto my superbike, the engine roared to life, cutting through the stillness of the night. I was no stranger to the feeling of being pursued, of being in the spotlight when I'd rather be hidden in the shadows. But tonight, it felt different. The thrill was gone, replaced by a heavy sense of urgency. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching, waiting for me to make the next move. I reached into my jacket, feeling for my phone, and quickly pulled it out. My fingers moved swiftly across the screen, typing the encrypted message to my supervisor. "I've got an envelope. I'm not sure who sent it, but I'm being followed." I didn't expect a reply immediately, but the silence on the other end was deafening. No one had contacted me in hours. Maybe I was too deep into this operation. Maybe I was alone, as I often felt. I shook my head, focusing on the road ahead. The long, winding highway stretched out in front of me like a ribbon, dark and endless. The night was quiet, save for the hum of my bike, but I knew that wouldn't last. I had to get to the safe house. I had to figure out what was going on. I needed answers. The trees along the side of the highway blurred past me, their branches swaying in the wind, and I pushed my bike faster, urging it to reach its full speed. I could hear my heart racing with every twist of the throttle. I needed to outrun the feeling, to outrun whatever it was that was after me. I had been trained for this. I had been trained to remain calm, to make decisions quickly, but right now, I wasn't sure I could trust anything. Not my instincts, not the people I worked with, and certainly not the envelope sitting in my pocket. The streetlights flickered as I rode past, casting long shadows on the road. The only sound was the steady beat of the engine. I glanced down at the envelope again, feeling its presence like a weight pressing on my chest. Whoever sent this knew me. They knew my moves. They knew exactly how to get to me. I couldn't shake the thought of that man's face, the one who had dropped it at my feet, who had looked at me with eyes full of secrets. He had known something. He had known that I was getting too close to something dangerous. But what? I didn't know yet, but I was determined to find out. I had to. The mission, whatever it was, wasn't just about uncovering secrets. It was about survival. A few miles down the road, I saw the safe house, its silhouette just visible in the distance. I pulled up to the gate, parking my bike and quickly dismounting. My heart was still pounding in my chest, but I didn't have time to process it. The only thing that mattered now was what was inside that envelope. I stepped inside the small, dimly lit building, the door creaking as I pushed it open. The air inside was stale, the faint smell of coffee lingering in the corner. It was a place I had been to before, a place I had used to plan and gather intel, but tonight, it felt different. The walls seemed closer, the shadows longer. As I moved to the table in the center of the room, I sat down, taking a deep breath and placing the envelope in front of me. With careful hands, I opened it. The paper inside was thick, textured, and old, like it had been in someone's possession for a long time. I unfolded it slowly, scanning the contents. The message was brief, but it hit me like a ton of bricks. We know what you're looking for. The truth isn't what you think. You've been lied to. Trust no one. I froze, my fingers trembling slightly as I read it over and over. What did this mean? Who was we? And what truth had I been searching for? My mind raced, trying to connect the dots. But all I could think of was the one word that seemed to echo through my mind. Lied. I hadn't been prepared for this. I had thought I knew what I was up against. But now, it seemed like the whole operation had been a lie, and I had been nothing more than a pawn in someone else's game. I couldn't trust anyone. Not now. Not anymore. The silence in the room was suffocating, the only sound the faint hum of the nearby streetlights. I stood up, pacing the room, trying to process everything. I couldn't let this go. I couldn't just walk away. The envelope had given me more questions than answers, but one thing was clear. I had to keep going. I had to find out who was behind all of this. Whoever they were powerful, and I wasn't going to let them get away with it. I sat in the dimly lit room, the weight of the envelope still fresh in my hands. The message inside had rattled me, but it also made me more determined than ever. I had been led to believe one thing, but now I knew the truth was something far more dangerous, something I wasn't fully prepared for. Trust no one. The words echoed in my mind. Who could I trust now? The people I worked with, the ones I thought were allies, they could very well be part of this web of lies. But how could I know for sure? How could I move forward when every step felt like a risk? I stood up abruptly, pacing the room, the quiet air thick with uncertainty. The message was cryptic, but it was clear. The mission I was on wasn't what I thought it was. I wasn't just uncovering corruption. I was about to uncover something far more complicated, far more dangerous. And I had no idea who I was dealing with. There was a knock at the door, sharp and sudden, pulling me out of my thoughts. I froze, my hand instinctively going to my jacket where my weapon was hidden. But I relaxed just as quickly. I wasn't expecting anyone, but it didn't feel like a threat either. I crossed the room, carefully approaching the door. When I opened it, I found no one standing outside. But then I noticed a small piece of paper pinned to the door with a simple push pin. I looked around, but there was no sign of anyone. I reached for the note, my fingers trembling slightly as I pulled it from the door. It was folded in half, the paper old and worn, just like the envelope. I opened it, scanning the message quickly. You're closer than you think. Trust no one, especially the ones who claim to help. I felt a chill run through me. This wasn't just a warning, it was a signal. Someone was watching me, someone who knew exactly what I was doing and was trying to make sure I didn't succeed. I closed the door slowly, my heart pounding. It was one thing to deal with hidden enemies in the shadows, but it was another thing entirely when those enemies seemed to know every move you made. I walked back to the table, staring at the envelope once more. There was no going back now. The game had changed, and I was playing for keeps. My phone buzzed in my pocket, startling me. I pulled it out quickly, my pulse quickening. It was a message from my supervisor. I opened it without hesitation. We know what you found. Meet at the usual spot. We need to talk. The usual spot. It was the place I'd gone to 100 times before, a place that felt like home, where I could let my guard down. But now, I wasn't sure I could trust it anymore. I wasn't sure I could trust anything. I grabbed my jacket, slipping the gun into the holster beneath my arm. I didn't know what was waiting for me, but I knew one thing. I wasn't walking in blind again. This time I was ready. As I stepped outside, the cool night air hit me, the sounds of the city buzzing in the distance. The streetlights cast long shadows on the ground, and I felt the weight of the mission pressing on me more than ever. The safe house was only a few miles away, but it felt like a lifetime. I started the bike and revved the engine, pulling out of the parking lot and back onto the dark road. The engine roared to life beneath me, and I leaned into the throttle, pushing the bike faster. The open road ahead felt endless, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was always right behind me, watching, waiting. I had to stay focused. I couldn't afford to let my guard down. Not now. As I neared the usual spot, I noticed the familiar silhouette of the building in the distance, just beyond the corner. I slowed the bike, scanning the area, making sure no one was watching. The last thing I needed was another surprise. I parked the bike in the alley behind the building, the engine humming softly as I dismounted. The street was quiet, eerily quiet. I could feel the tension in the air as I approached the back door of the building. I knocked 3 times, each tap echoing in the silence. There was no immediate response. I waited, my hand on the door handle, heart racing. Finally, the door creaked open, and a familiar face appeared in the doorway. It was my contact, someone I had worked with for years, someone I thought I could trust. But now, everything felt off. His eyes flickered nervously as he looked me over. "You're late," he said, his voice strained. I stepped inside, keeping my guard up. "I've been busy," I replied, my voice steady despite the storm of questions swirling in my mind. "What's going on? What do you know about this?" He hesitated, glancing over his shoulder before shutting the door behind me. "We need to talk," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But not here." He motioned for me to follow him down the narrow hallway. As we walked, I could feel the weight of his words hanging in the air. This wasn't just another debrief. This wasn't just another day at the office. This was different, and I wasn't sure I was ready for whatever was coming next. I followed my contact down the narrow hallway, the dim light above flickering as we moved further into the building. The air felt thick, as if it had been holding its breath for a long time. The sound of our footsteps echoed against the cold walls, and I could feel the tension building with every step. This place was familiar, but tonight, it felt different. We reached the door at the end of the hall, and he paused, glancing around before he opened it. Inside, the room was small, with a table in the center and a few chairs scattered around. It smelled of old wood and dust. He motioned for me to sit, and I did, watching as he closed the door behind us. "This isn't just another assignment, is it?" I asked, my voice steady despite the unease gnawing at me. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he sat down across from me and placed a file on the table. "What do you know about the operation?" he asked, his eyes meeting mine. "What do you mean?" I responded, my heart rate picking up. He slid the file across the table to me. "You're not the only one with secrets. We've all been kept in the dark. But now it's time to face the truth." My hand hesitated for a moment before I reached for the file, the weight of his words sinking in. "The truth? What truth?" I opened the file carefully, scanning the pages inside. There were names, dates, and locations, things that meant nothing to me. But then I saw something that made my stomach drop. A list of agents, and my name was on it. What is this? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. It's a list of everyone involved in the operation, he said, leaning back in his chair. And the one thing that ties them all together. Your mission isn't about what you think it is. You've been digging for answers, but what you've uncovered so far is just the surface. I felt a cold chill run down my spine. This wasn't just about a simple investigation. This was something much larger, something far more dangerous. What do you mean? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He didn't answer. Right away. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out another envelope, similar to the one I had received earlier. He placed it on the table in front of me. I stared at it, the familiar weight of it making my hands tremble slightly. You're in deeper than you think. But you can't trust anyone, not even me, he said. This is the key to everything. What you need to understand is that you're not just uncovering corruption. You're about to discover something that will change everything. And once you know the truth, there's no going back. I took the envelope, feeling the paper between my fingers, my heart racing. I opened it slowly, my mind racing with questions. Inside was a single piece of paper with one sentence written on it. The operation you're part of is compromised. There are no allies left. My hand froze. I looked up at him, my heart pounding in my chest. What does this mean? I asked, the words barely leaving my mouth. He stood up, his face grim. It means that your mission was never about justice. It was always about control. And now, you're in the middle of a game that you don't fully understand. My mind raced. Everything I thought I knew was crumbling before me. This wasn't just a job. This was a trap, a web of lies, and I was caught in the middle of it. I had no allies, no one to turn to. Who can I trust? I asked, the question coming out almost as a plea. He looked at me for a long moment before answering. You can't trust anyone, he said quietly. But there's one person who knows more than anyone else. You'll have to go after them. The truth is locked away, and they're the only one who can unlock it. I felt a knot form in my stomach. Who? I asked, my voice barely audible. He hesitated, then said, someone who's been watching you from the beginning. The words hung in the air like a threat. I didn't need to ask who he meant. I already knew. The person behind all of this was someone I had never suspected. Someone close to me. I stood up suddenly, the adrenaline pumping through my veins. Where do I find them? I demanded. He hesitated, then said, it's not that simple. You'll have to go. Off the grid. No more contact with anyone you know. If you want the truth, you'll have to trust yourself. I nodded, the weight of his words settling on my shoulders. The truth was out there, and I was the only one who could find it. But first, I had to disappear. I grabbed the envelope, shoved it into my jacket, and turned to leave. But just before I stepped out the door, I stopped. I won't stop until I get the answers, I said, my voice firm. He nodded, his expression unreadable. Good luck. You'll need it. With that, I stepped out into the night, the weight of the world on my shoulders. I didn't know what awaited me, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't stop now. The game had changed, and I was playing for keeps. I stepped into the night, the air sharp and biting as I walked away from the building. My mind was spinning with the weight of what I had just learned. The truth I had been chasing for months now felt closer than ever, but the path ahead was darker, filled with more uncertainty than I had ever imagined. The file, the envelope, the cryptic messages, everything was a puzzle, and I had just uncovered a piece. But what was I supposed to do with it? The words from my contact echoed in my mind. You can't trust anyone. As I walked toward my bike, I looked around, scanning the area for any signs of danger. The street was quiet, too quiet, like the calm before a storm. My heart was still pounding in my chest, the adrenaline from the revelation coursing through me. I couldn't stay here. Not anymore. I needed to move, to get away from this place before anyone caught wind of what I knew. I mounted my bike and revved the engine, the sound cutting through the silence like a warning. The wind whipped against my face as I sped down the empty road, the headlights casting long shadows across the pavement. I wasn't sure where I was going, but I couldn't stay still. The city behind me faded into the distance, and the road ahead stretched out like an endless ribbon. I needed answers. I needed to know who was behind all of this, who had pulled the strings from the shadows. As I drove, my thoughts wandered back to the message. You've been digging for answers, but what you've uncovered so far is just the surface. That was the key, I realized. The surface. I had only scratched the surface of something much bigger. But who was pulling the strings? Who was orchestrating this web of lies and deception? I didn't have the answers yet, but I knew I had to keep moving forward. I couldn't afford to look back. A few miles later, I found myself at a small, deserted gas station. It was the perfect place to stop, to think, and to regroup. I pulled in and killed the engine, the quiet hum of the bike's motor slowly fading away. The gas station was empty, save for a flickering light above the pumps. I dismounted and walked to the side of the building, my mind still racing. I needed to think. I pulled the envelope from my jacket and unfolded the note again. The operation you're part of is compromised. There are no allies left. The words seemed to burn into my mind. I could feel the weight of them, the truth of them settling deep in my chest. No allies left. I wasn't sure who to trust anymore, but I knew one thing for sure. I was on my own. The silence around me felt oppressive, like it was pressing in from all sides. I leaned against the building, taking a deep breath and trying to clear my mind. My phone buzzed in my pocket, pulling me out of my thoughts. I quickly checked the screen, my heart skipping a beat. It was another message from my supervisor. We need to meet. Now. It's urgent. I didn't hesitate. I knew what this meant. It meant I was getting closer to the truth. But it also meant the danger was getting closer too. I quickly pocketed the phone and headed back to my bike. I didn't have time to waste. I had to find out who was behind all of this before they found me. The road stretched out before me, empty and endless, but I wasn't afraid. I couldn't afford to be afraid. Not now. As I sped through the night, I could feel the weight of my decision pressing down on me. I didn't know what I was about to walk into, but I knew I had no choice. I had to face whatever was coming. The truth had always been just out of reach, but now, it felt like it was within my grasp, and I was willing to risk everything to find it. I pulled into the dark alley, the familiar red brick building of the safe house standing silently in front of me. The wind had picked up, rustling the few leaves that were scattered on the ground. I took a deep breath, steadying myself for what was to come. The message from my supervisor still lingered in my mind, the urgency of it weighing heavily on me. We need to meet. Now. It's urgent. That could mean anything. My instincts told me something had changed. I was being pulled into a situation I wasn't fully prepared for, but there was no turning back now. I parked my bike a few feet from the door, making sure to stay out of sight. The street was quieter than usual, the dim streetlights flickering as I made my way toward the entrance. As I approached, I glanced around, checking for any signs of movement, but the alley was empty. I reached the door and knocked twice, the sound sharp and deliberate. It creaked open almost immediately. My contact, a man I'd worked with before, stepped into the doorway. His face was tight, his expression unreadable. "You're here," he said, his voice low. "I wasn't sure if you would make it." I wasn't sure myself. I replied, my voice steady despite the knot in my stomach. I followed him inside, the familiar scent of stale coffee and old paper filling the air. The room was just as I remembered, cluttered with old files, papers scattered across the table, and a faint hum of an old computer in the corner. But tonight, the atmosphere felt different. Tense. "What's going on?" I asked, my eyes scanning the room, trying to read the situation. He closed the door behind me, locking it with a soft click. "We've been compromised," he said, his voice quieter now. "The operation. It's not what we thought. It's much bigger than we realized." My heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" I asked, my mind racing. "We've been played. The people we thought we were working with? They're not who they say they are," he continued, his eyes darting nervously around the room. "There's someone else pulling the strings, someone we didn't account for." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Who?" I demanded, my voice firm. "I don't know yet," he said, pacing the room. "But I've been getting intel. There's a leak in the system, and it's been feeding information to the wrong people." "This doesn't make sense," I said, trying to wrap my head around it. "I thought we had it under control." "We did," he replied, his voice growing more urgent. "But now, I'm not sure we can trust anyone anymore. The stakes have been raised." I glanced at the stack of papers on the table, trying to make sense of it all. "So what now?" I asked, my pulse quickening. He turned to face me, his eyes dark with worry. "We need to find out who's behind this, and fast. There's no time to waste." "But how? How do we even begin?" I asked, frustration creeping into my voice. "I've been tracking some leads. I need you to follow up on them. The truth is out there, but it's buried deep. You're the only one who can get to it." I nodded, determination flooding my veins. This was it. The moment I'd been waiting for. I wasn't backing down now. "I'll do whatever it takes," I said, my voice unwavering. He handed me a small file, the same one I had seen earlier. "Take this," he said, his tone sharp. "It's the only lead we have. You need to move quickly." I took the file from him, my hand steady. The weight of it felt like the burden of the entire operation. This was my chance to get the answers I had been searching for. But it came with a price. "Be careful," he said, his voice low. "They're watching. They've been watching you for a while now." I looked at him, the realization hitting me hard. "I can handle it," I replied, forcing confidence into my voice. I wasn't sure if I believed it, but I couldn't afford to doubt myself now. "I'll be in touch," I added, my gaze locking with his. Without another word, I turned and walked out the door. The cold night air hit me like a slap in the face, the chill making me shiver. I climbed back onto my bike, the engine roaring to life beneath me. The road stretched out. Before me, dark and endless, but I wasn't afraid anymore. I had a purpose now. I had a lead. I knew the truth was within reach. All I had to do was grab it. I revved the engine of my bike as I sped down the darkened streets, the headlights illuminating the path ahead. The cold night air whipped past my face, but I didn't feel it. My mind was racing, each thought sharper than the wind. The file in my jacket pocket felt like a weight on my chest. It was the key to everything. Everything I had been working toward, everything I had been trying to uncover. But as I drove through the empty streets, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The sense of urgency that had built up in me was now accompanied by a creeping dread. Someone was following me. I tried to push the thought aside, but it gnawed at me. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I pulled it out quickly, my fingers trembling slightly as I checked the screen. Another encrypted message from my supervisor. "The safe house is compromised. We need to change plans. Meet me at the location." Immediately, my heart skipped a beat. The safe house. I had been there just hours ago, but now it was no longer safe. This was bigger than I had imagined. Someone had figured out what we were doing, and now, everything was in jeopardy. I punched the throttle, pushing the bike faster, my focus narrowing on the road ahead. I couldn't let anyone get ahead of me. I couldn't let them stop me. As I neared the location, I pulled into a quiet side street, parking the bike in the shadow of a nearby building. I shut off the engine, listening carefully. The street was eerily quiet, the only sound the faint hum of the city in the distance. I looked around, checking for any signs of movement, but there was nothing. The coast seemed clear. I slipped the phone into my pocket, the weight of the file in my jacket reminding me of everything that was at stake. I couldn't afford to make a mistake now. I made my way toward the building, my footsteps muffled by the asphalt beneath me. The door to the building was cracked open, just a sliver, and I hesitated for a moment, wondering if it was a trap. But I had no choice. I had to go inside. I pushed the door open quietly, slipping into the dimly lit room. The air inside was cool, and the faint smell of dust and old paper hung in the air. I closed the door behind me, making sure it clicked shut. My eyes adjusted to the low light as I scanned the room. There was no one here yet. I took a step forward, my heart racing, my mind working through the possibilities. It was too quiet. The feeling of being watched returned, stronger now. I wasn't alone. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach. I walked further into the room, the shadows seeming to stretch further with every step. My eyes darted around, but there was no sign of movement. Just when I thought I was safe, I heard the sound of footsteps behind me. I spun around, my hand reaching for the gun in my jacket, but there was nothing. No one. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. But the sense of unease remained, thick in the air. The door creaked, and I turned quickly, expecting someone to walk in. Instead, it was just a shadow passing by the window. I wasn't sure whether it was my nerves getting the best of me, or if I was truly being hunted. I moved to the back of the room and knelt next to the desk, where a small lamp illuminated a set of papers. It wasn't much, but it was something. The file from my supervisor was still heavy in my pocket, but I wasn't ready to open it just yet. I needed more information. I picked up the papers and scanned them quickly. They were mostly notes and names I didn't recognize, but one name stood out. Samuel Carter. The name sent a chill down my spine. He was the one I had been trying to track down for weeks. The one person who could unlock the mystery behind everything. And now, it seemed like I was closer to him than I had ever been. The door creaked again, this time louder, and I turned sharply, my instincts kicking in. This time, I wasn't alone. A figure stepped into the doorway, his face obscured by a hood. I stood up quickly, my heart pounding. But I didn't pull my weapon just yet. "You're not supposed to be here," the figure said, his voice low and steady. I didn't recognize the voice, but I wasn't about to take any chances. "Who are you?" I asked, keeping my voice even. The figure didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took a step forward, his eyes locking onto mine. "You're looking for answers," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "But you're asking the wrong questions." I felt my pulse quicken. "What do you mean?" I asked, my hand inching toward the gun in my jacket. "The truth is closer than you think," he said, his tone almost cryptic. "But be careful. It's more dangerous than you know." He paused, as if waiting for something. I couldn't shake the feeling that this was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment everything would be revealed. But I had no idea who this man was, or what he wanted. He stepped closer, his presence almost suffocating. "The truth will set you free," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But it will also destroy everything you thought you knew." My mind was racing, but I couldn't let him get the upper hand. "What's your name?" I demanded. The man didn't respond. Instead, he turned and disappeared into the shadows, leaving me standing in the dimly lit room, the weight of his words hanging in the air like a warning. I stood in the dim room, the shadows creeping in around me, the weight of the man's words lingering like smoke in the air. "The truth will set you free, but it will also destroy everything you thought you knew." His voice echoed in my mind, but he was gone. Gone into the darkness, leaving me standing there, uncertain, questioning everything. I should have chased after him, demanded more answers, but I knew better. If he wanted to speak, he would return. And if he didn't, I would have to find another way to uncover the truth. I reached for the file in my jacket, the cool paper comforting in my hands. My fingers skimmed the edges of the papers inside, but I didn't open it just yet. My mind was still racing, trying to process the cryptic message, trying to make sense of the trail I had been following. The truth. What was the truth? What had I been missing all this time? I wasn't sure, but I knew I was getting closer. Closer to something big, something life-changing. And that scared me. The truth wasn't always what you wanted it to be. Sometimes it was dangerous. Sometimes it had the power to destroy everything you had worked for, everything you thought you knew about the world. I couldn't let that stop me. I had come too far, and I wasn't backing down now. But something in me hesitated. The words of my contact, the warning, they had struck a chord. I wasn't just uncovering corruption anymore. This was bigger than I ever imagined. I turned, my feet moving instinctively toward the door. I had to keep moving. I had to follow the thread and see where it led. But something made me stop. A noise. A faint sound. Almost imperceptible, but it was enough to make me freeze. The door behind me creaked softly, and I spun around, my heart pounding in my chest. It was just a shadow. Just a trick of the light. I sighed, forcing myself to calm down. I had to focus. I couldn't afford distractions now. I slipped the file back into my jacket and stepped toward the door. I paused for a moment, listening to the silence. It was heavy, oppressive, too quiet. Something wasn't right. I pushed the door open, stepping back into the alley. The air was cold, and the city seemed to be holding its breath. I glanced around, my eyes scanning the shadows, but there was no movement. No one was following me. Not yet. I was getting paranoid. That was all. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. It had become a constant companion. I walked briskly toward my bike, trying to push the feeling aside. I couldn't let fear control me. Not now. Not when I was so close to uncovering the truth. I threw my leg over the bike and started the engine, the roar of the motor breaking the silence. I pulled out onto the street, the headlights cutting through the darkness. The city stretched out before me, its lights twinkling in the distance. But I wasn't fooled. I knew that somewhere in the shadows, someone was waiting for me, waiting to make their move. I had to get to the next safe house. I had to get there. Before they did. The roads blurred beneath me as I sped through the streets, my mind focused solely on the mission. The file was burning a hole in my jacket, but I didn't open it. Not yet. I couldn't afford to lose focus. Not when every step felt like it might be my last. The safe house was just ahead. A nondescript building, tucked away in a quiet corner of the city. It was my last chance to regroup, to figure out what to do next. As I neared the building, I slowed, my eyes darting to the alleyways, to the dark corners where danger always lurked. I parked my bike around the corner, keeping to the shadows as I approached the entrance. The door was already slightly ajar. I pushed it open cautiously, stepping inside. The lights flickered overhead, casting eerie shadows across the room. The air inside smelled of stale coffee and dust. It was empty. For a moment, I wondered if I had been followed, if they were waiting for me. But the room was quiet, still. I took a deep breath and moved further into the room. It was too quiet. There were no signs of anyone else here. No sounds, no movement. Just silence. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Something wasn't right. The safe house had been compromised. It had to be. I wasn't sure who was behind it, but I couldn't stay here. Not anymore. I turned and rushed toward the back door, but as I passed the window, I saw something in the reflection. A shadow, moving across the alley. I froze. There was no mistaking it. I wasn't alone. The door behind me creaked open, and I spun around. This time, I wasn't just facing shadows. I was facing the truth. Whoever was out there was getting closer, and I wasn't sure I was ready for what they would do next. I could feel my heart pounding as I stood frozen in the room, the silence thick and unnerving. My eyes were glued to the window, where the shadow moved swiftly across the alley. The door creaked again, and I turned quickly, my instincts kicking in. I wasn't alone, that much was clear. Whoever was out there had been waiting for me, and now, I had to make a decision. I couldn't just stay here and wait. I had to keep moving. I reached for the gun in my jacket, the familiar weight of it a small comfort in the tense silence. My hand was steady, but my mind was racing. The truth, the file, the cryptic messages, all of it was leading me down a path I wasn't sure I could navigate. The room felt like it was closing in on me, the walls pressing in with each passing second. I couldn't afford to let fear take control. Not now. Not when I was so close to uncovering the truth. I turned toward the door, my body tensing with each step. The footsteps outside grew louder, closer, and I knew I had to act fast. I needed to get out of here before they found me. But the question lingered in my mind. Who were they, and why were they after me? I reached for the back door, turning the handle slowly, making sure there was no noise. The door creaked slightly as it opened, and I winced. I stepped out into the alley, the cool night air hitting my face. The shadows seemed to stretch farther than usual, and every sound felt amplified. I moved quickly, keeping low to the ground, trying to stay hidden in the darkness. My breath was shallow, my senses heightened as I made my way toward the street. I couldn't stop now. I had to stay focused. The street was quiet, but that didn't mean I was safe. I glanced over my shoulder, but there was no one following me. Not yet. I kept moving, my pace quickening as I neared my bike. The file in my jacket felt heavier than before, the weight of the information inside pressing down on me. I had to find out what was in that file, what it all meant. My mind was swirling with possibilities, but I couldn't afford to get lost in them. I had to keep moving forward. I reached my bike and mounted it quickly, starting the engine. The roar of the motor broke the silence, but it didn't make me feel any safer. If anything, it made me more aware of how vulnerable I was. The engine hummed beneath me, the vibration a steady reminder of what was at stake. I sped down the street, my mind still racing. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I pulled it out quickly. It was another encrypted message from my supervisor. I opened it without hesitation. Meet me at the next location. It's urgent. They're coming for you. I read the message twice, trying to process it. Who were they? Why were they coming for me? I had no answers, only questions. I pushed the bike faster, my eyes scanning the streets for any signs of danger. The city seemed darker than usual, the streets eerily quiet. I could feel the tension building, the fear creeping back in, but I refused to let it take control. Not when I was so close. I wasn't just running away. I was running toward something. The truth. I had to find it, no matter what the cost. I reached the new location, a nondescript building on the edge of the city. I parked the bike in the shadows, making sure no one could see me. I didn't want to be spotted. Not yet. I needed to meet my contact and get the answers I had been searching for. I approached the building cautiously, my steps silent as I moved toward the entrance. The door was slightly ajar, just like the last one. I pushed it open slowly, stepping inside. The room was dark, but there was a faint light coming from the corner. I moved toward it, my senses on high alert. And then I saw him. My contact. He was sitting at the table, his face obscured by the shadows, but I could tell he was waiting for me. You made it, he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. I nodded, but I didn't speak. I didn't trust my voice right now. Everything was too chaotic, too uncertain. You're closer than ever, he continued, his tone dark. But you're not the only one looking for the truth. And you're not the only one willing to do anything to get it. My heart skipped a beat. What are you talking about? I demanded, stepping closer. You need to be careful, he warned, his eyes meeting mine for the first time. There are people out there who will stop at nothing to keep the truth buried. And they know you're coming. My mind raced. Who are they? I asked. Who's behind all of this? He didn't answer right away. He just stared at me, as if deciding whether or not to trust me. Finally, he spoke. You won't like the answer, but you need to know. The people you're looking for? They've been controlling everything from the beginning, and they won't stop until they get what they want. I felt a chill run down my spine. I wasn't ready for this, but I had no choice. I had to keep going. The truth was out there, and I was getting closer. But at what cost? I could feel the weight of the words hanging in the air, heavy with meaning. The man sitting in front of me had just given me the answer I had been searching for, but it was not the answer I wanted to hear. The people you're looking for? They've been controlling everything from the beginning, and they won't stop until they get what they want. His voice was steady, but there was an underlying sense of fear, a warning that I couldn't ignore. My mind raced, trying to process what he had just said. The implications were enormous. The stakes had always been high, but now they had reached a new level of danger. These people, whoever they were, had been pulling the strings the entire time. The lies, the manipulation, the hidden agendas, it was all part of a larger plan. I had been a pawn, just like everyone else. But now, I had the chance to take control. I couldn't back down. Not now. Who are they? I demanded, my voice tight with urgency. Who's behind this? He paused for a long moment, his eyes never leaving mine. For the first time, he seemed uncertain, as though he wasn't sure whether he could trust me with the truth. I didn't wait for him to speak. I need to know, I pressed. If I'm going to stop them, I need to know who I'm up against. He sighed, running a hand through his hair, his expression a mix of frustration and resignation. You don't want to hear this, he said quietly, almost to himself. But I'll tell you anyway. They're the ones who control everything. Politicians, businessmen, law enforcement. They've been operating in the shadows for decades. They've manipulated the system, controlled the narrative, and now they're making their move. My breath caught in my throat as his words hit me like a punch. It wasn't just a few corrupt individuals. It was a network, a powerful, far-reaching conspiracy that had infiltrated every level of society. So what now? I asked, my mind spinning. How do we stop them? He leaned forward, his eyes intense. We expose them. We tear down their empire piece by piece. But we have to be careful. They're everywhere. They're watching. I nodded slowly, my pulse quickening. I had known it wouldn't be easy, but now the true scale of the challenge was becoming clear. These people, whoever they were not just going to roll over. They would fight back, and they would do whatever it took to protect themselves. I had to be smarter. I had to be faster. I couldn't afford any mistakes. What's the next step? I asked, the weight of the decision settling over me. He stood up, walking to the small window at the far side of the room. His back was to me, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his body was coiled, ready to spring into action. We need to find their weak points, he said, his voice low. We need to find someone who knows the truth. Someone who can help us take them down. My mind raced with the possibilities. There had to be someone who had seen through the lies, someone who knew what was really going on. But who? Where do we start? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. We start with the people who've been closest to them, he replied. The ones who know their secrets. The ones who've been silenced. My stomach churned. I knew what he meant. We were going to have to dig deep into their network, find the cracks in their armor. But that meant getting close to people who had no hesitation about protecting their interests, no matter the cost. This is bigger than we thought, I muttered, feeling the weight of it all pressing down on me. It's bigger than I thought. He turned to face me, his eyes hard with resolve. That's why we have to be careful. One wrong move, and it's over. I nodded, feeling the burden of his words. I was in this now, and there was no turning back. The file in my jacket pocket felt like a ticking time bomb, a reminder that I had the power to bring it all crashing down, but only if I was smart enough to stay ahead of them. So what's the plan? I asked. We find their connections, he said, stepping toward me. We start with the ones closest to them. People who know the truth. And we get them to talk. I felt a surge of determination. And if they don't talk? I asked, my voice steely. We make them, he said, his voice cold. I didn't need to ask what he meant. We had a job to do, and I was ready to do whatever it took to get the truth. We had to stay one step ahead of them, no matter the cost. There was no room for hesitation, no room for mistakes. The game had changed, and I was in it for the long haul. I wasn't just searching for answers anymore. I was searching for justice. I stood there, the file in my hand feeling heavier than ever. The weight of the moment pressed down on me as I realized just how deep I had gotten into this. The truth was within reach, but I could feel the danger closing in around me. There was no turning back now. As I looked at my contact, who had just given me the last piece of the puzzle, I knew that everything had changed. The path I was on was darker, more treacherous than I could have ever imagined. We find their connections, he had said. Start with the ones closest to them, the ones who know the truth. But even as I thought about it, I knew it wouldn't be easy. These people, whoever they were, had built an empire of lies, and I was standing at the center of it all. I was in the middle of something much bigger than I had ever expected, and I couldn't afford to make a wrong move. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. I couldn't help but think about how far I had come. I wasn't just trying to expose corruption anymore. I was trying to take down a network, a hidden force pulling the strings of everyone and everything. And I was the one who had to stop them. My mind raced as I thought about my next move. I couldn't just go after anyone. I had to be strategic. I had to find the right people, the ones who knew the secrets, the ones who could help me bring everything to light. But who? Who could I trust? Time is running out, I whispered to myself, pacing the small room. The weight of the decision was crushing, but I knew I didn't have a choice. I had to act. I had to expose the people behind the lies. But I wasn't going to do it alone. The next few hours would be critical. I couldn't afford to hesitate. I needed to find someone, anyone, who could point me in the right direction. The door behind me creaked open, and I spun around, my hand instinctively reaching for my jacket, for the weapon I kept close. But it wasn't my contact. It was a figure in the doorway, a shadow barely visible in the dim light. You're looking for someone, aren't you? The voice was low, almost a whisper, but it hit me like a shockwave. I didn't answer right away. I was still trying to process what was happening. Who was this person? How did they know? What do you want? I finally asked, my voice steady, though my heart was racing. I'm here to help, the figure said, stepping into the room. It was a woman, her face partially hidden in the shadows, but there was something about her that made me pause. Help? How? I asked, narrowing my eyes. I know what you're up against, she said, her voice firm. And I know how to take them down. My breath caught in my throat. You know who's behind this? I asked, my voice filled with a mixture of hope and skepticism. She nodded slowly, her eyes meeting mine with a quiet intensity. I've been watching you, she said. I've been watching them. And I know exactly what they're capable of. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know whether to trust her, but something about her seemed genuine. She wasn't afraid. Who are you? I asked, stepping closer, my guard still up. My name is Emily, she said, her eyes never leaving mine. And I'm the one who can get you the answers you need. I wasn't sure what to make of her, but I knew I needed all the help I could get. Why should I trust you? I asked, not able to shake the feeling that I was walking into something I couldn't fully control. Because you don't have a choice, Emily replied, her voice low and steady. And if you want to take them down, you'll need me. Trust me, I know how this game is played. Her words hit me like a slap in the face. She was right. I had no choice. I couldn't do this alone. The people I was up against were too powerful, too connected. If I wanted to win, I had to work with her. But what if she was part of the enemy? What if she had her own agenda? I pushed the thought aside. I couldn't afford to be paranoid. Not now. What do we do next? I asked, my voice calm but determined. We start digging, she said, a small smile playing at the corners of her lips. We find the cracks in their armor, and we expose them for what they really are. It sounded simple, but I knew it wouldn't be easy. We were up against an enemy with far more resources than we had. But that was the point, wasn't it? I wasn't here to fight a fair battle. I was here to win. Let's get to work, I said, the fire in my chest reigniting. This was it. The beginning of the end. And I was ready.